Good evening and welcome to the Town of Cary Planning and Zoning Board meeting. Thank you for joining us tonight. I now call this meeting to order. Our board clerk, Julie Mitchell, will take roll call for the evening.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, the following board members are absent: Sal Camarada, Andy Coe, Ken George. The following board members are present: Boshana Etten, Chris Johnson, Mike Roselli, Stephen Crutchfield, Sean McAndrew, and Jeff Moncrief.
Thank you. The Cary Community Plan will continue to be the guiding document for this board. Our role is to function as citizen advisors to the town council who will make zoning activity. Our citizens' opinions are based on the Cary Community Plan document, and we play a very important role in advising our town leaders. While this is a public meeting, it is not a public hearing. There is no opportunity for the public to speak during this meeting. However, if you have comments about any of the items, we encourage you to reach out to the staff by email or phone. You may also reach out to the board members through email. You can contact the council directly through email or during the public speaks out portion of any regularly scheduled town council meeting. These meetings may be streamed live on the Town of Cary's website and will be posted to YouTube. All past planning and zoning meetings are available to view on YouTube. The first action for tonight will be the adoption of the agenda. Would someone like to make a motion to adopt the agenda, assuming that there's no suggested changes?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The next item is the approval of the regular meeting minutes from the August 26th session. These are posted online. Everyone's had an opportunity to read them, and unless there are any corrections or changes, would someone make a motion to approve the August 26th meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Thank you. We only have one case tonight. It is 23 REZ05 South Hills PDP rezoning. Katie Dry, Assistant Planning Director, will share the staff's presentation. Due to the size of this case, the board was sent the council public hearing video earlier to view to provide background and additional information for the case. Following the presentation, as usual, the applicant will share their remarks and board members will have a chance to ask questions of the staff and the applicant. Thank you.
Great. Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Board. I'm happy to be here tonight presenting to you the South Hills rezoning. As the board chair mentioned, this is the only case on the agenda tonight. And due to the size of the presentation, my speaking part will be a little bit longer than normal. And I also wanted to recognize that we have a little more staff here than normal. We have our members of our Development Review Committee here with us tonight. If you're a member of the DRC, would you raise your hand? Great, thank you. So this represents my colleagues from various departments, including Development Services, Transit, Transportation, Stormwater, Urban Forestry, Utilities, Planning, Fire, Urban Design, Housing, and then also Community Projects. And as always, we have our legal team with us tonight. So these team members are generally reviewing any of the requests that come before you, but due to the size of the project tonight, we have them here with us in person. So I'm glad to have them here because this has been a team effort to get to this point. So with that, let's dive in. So this presentation will include some introductory remarks about the site, highlights. We'll get into a detailed rezoning description, project analysis using the Imagine Cary Community Plan. Followed by that, we'll have the applicant's comments, and then there will be plenty of time for Planning and Zoning Board discussion and questions following that. So let's start with the site. The South Hills Shopping Center is located near the intersection of two highways, I-40 and US 1. The center includes a small interior mall and several outparcel buildings. And this mall was developed at a time when malls were very popular in the United States. In fact, this is a picture of one of the first malls in America, developed by the pioneering architect Victor Gruen, who in 1956 built this mall, and his concept was to have two large anchor stores connected by interior stores to promote interior foot traffic. So South Hills was developed right in the height of that time when malls were being built across the United States. It was constructed by David Martin Sr. And constructed in the 1960s. The mall opened in the 70s and was ultimately expanded in the 1980s. The assemblage of land for this rezoning includes the entire South Hills Mall Plaza, plus Grace Christian School, which includes properties to the north. It also includes properties to the west of Buck Jones Road, shown here for a total of about 44 acres, shown in the highlighted yellow area. Today, the South Hills Mall includes a variety of tenants, such as the Grand Asia Market, Rose's, everyone's favorite donut shop, and of course, the very popular NCDMV tag and title agency location. Always has a lion there. The built form and the existing conditions of the site include 436,877 square feet of building area, with 1,800 surface parking spaces. We measured the area used for surface parking spaces, and it accounts for roughly 49% of the property currently. The zoning today for all of the parcels is general commercial. There are no conditions on this zoning, so any of the uses that you see here would be allowed by right today and could be redeveloped at any time. So some of the current allowable uses, just to name a few, could include kennel, restaurant, funeral home, car wash, and of course, any of the uses that you see here on this list. This site was purchased by the applicant team in 2019, and their vision has evolved through collaboration with Cary from a purely adaptive reuse project to an urban mixed-use project, which you'll see more of tonight. This project will allow redevelopment and density within a destination center, as determined by the Imagine Cary community plan. It will create a resilient block structure, establish a holistic vision. It will allow for a civic use, which could be the home of the future center project, which would be built by the town of Cary, which of course is associated with the 2024 Cary Community Bond referendum. Key commitments of the site include redevelopment of the existing shopping center to a mixed-use district, building heights which could range up to 23 floors adjacent to the highway and as low as 2 to 3 floors or stories adjacent to residential uses to the west. There will be active ground floor uses, use of structured parking, 60,000 square feet of community gathering area, which is roughly an acre and a half, and a comprehensive transportation strategy, which will include building a street grid, use of transportation demand management, which I'll talk a little bit more about, bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, and active uses along a pedestrian way. Uses modeled in the traffic study include 550,000 square feet of commercial uses, 235,000 square feet of research and development, 935,000 square feet for office, public and institutional uses, 350 hotel rooms, 1,775 multifamily dwellings, and 328,000 square feet for civic use, which would be the center. Allowable uses include residential, office, commercial, and limited options for industrial uses. For residential, the uses would include life care community, nursing home, and multifamily. Under the industrial uses, there would be an allowance for research laboratory. As noted, the current zoning is general commercial. Again, no conditions currently included on the site. And the applicant is seeking the mixed-use district, or MXD, which allows the applicant to set their own dimensional standards and propose alternative standards to the land development ordinance. So talking more about the MXD district. MXD also requires a preliminary development plan to be submitted. In this case, the South Hills development, due to the size and the assemblage, the applicant team is proposing a framework for redevelopment to occur. And at the heart of the framework is turning the existing Surface Park Shopping Center into a network of streets forming a grid network, which could create up to 27 development blocks. And within the development, there will be 75% use of structured parking and 60,000 square feet of community gathering area distributed through the site. To govern the framework, the development team has proposed a set of district development standards which propose site-specific standards for architecture, public art, signage, development plans, active uses and streetscapes, community gathering areas, and reuse and redevelopment. The site has been divided into 3 sub-districts for the purposes of phasing and infrastructure improvements. The first 2 sub-districts are located on the east side of Buck Jones Road, with the third being located on the west side. Unlike other developments that we typically see, the site is not governing the location of uses by pod or zone. Instead, it'll govern uses by a land use ratio and regulation of active ground floor uses. First, the land use ratio is proposed to allow 25,000 or to require 25,000 square feet of non-residential area be maintained for every 100 multifamily units. And this ratio must be balanced throughout the site duration to control the mixing of uses on the site. Secondly, the site would regulate active ground floor uses. So they've divided the ground floor uses into 3 types: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary uses include uses that would be most active, so like retail, restaurant, uses that have a lot of public activity. The primary ground floor active uses would be located along this salmon-colored area that runs north and south through the site on the east side of Buck Jones Road. Secondary uses would include lobbies, ground floor offices, things like that. Those uses would be allowed along other ground floor frontages. Lastly, there will be some allowance for tertiary active uses, which would allow for service areas, loadings, more back-of-house type operations typically. So running north and south through the site and aligning with the active ground floor uses is a pedestrian way. And so this will be an area that is accommodated for pedestrians and bicyclists, and the most active of uses will be fronting this pedestrian way, again running north and south through the site. Building heights have been established within 3 height zones. Height Zone 1, which is the western part of the site and adjacent to residential uses, will allow for buildings between 2 to 6 floors. Height Zone 2, which frames Buck Jones Road, will allow for an increase in height between 3 to 15 floors. And Height Zone 3, which is closest to the highway and along the eastern portion of the site, will allow for the tallest heights ranging between 3 to 23 floors. The site is proposing a custom cross-sections that will include accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists. There will also be provisions for on-street parking. And again, the pedestrian way, which runs north and south through the site, will provide plenty of accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists as well. The applicant has also committed that a transit hub will be included within the site. The location of the hub has not yet been determined, but key characteristics of a hub could include additional amenities such as bicycle and scooter rental or storage, wayfinding signage, scheduling boards, shaded or conditioned waiting areas. And the amenities listed here are in the standards book and not necessarily committed to as conditions. Due to the mixed-use nature of the site and access to transit, bicycle, and pedestrian accommodations, the applicants are proposing a reduced parking ratio for multifamily dwellings. The parking ratio would require 1 space per bedrooms, or for 1 bedrooms or studios, and then for each additional bedroom, it would be required to have an additional half space. So you can see this is slightly less than our LDO requirement for multifamily, but it is in alignment with some of the reduced multifamily that we would find within Cary's town center. There will also be no visitor parking required. The parking rate is also, the parking commitments also include a 75% parking commitment to use of structured parking decks, and this is above and beyond Cary's requirements, which does not require structured parking. They've also committed to EV charging by a ratio, 1 space per 200 spaces, and they're also committing to running conduit at a rate of 10 per 200 spaces. To continue building on efficiencies of the mixed-use development, the applicants are also proposing specific allowances for shared parking. They're proposing that up to 70% of parking for a use could be accommodated through shared parking. This is an increase from Cary's requirement of 35% for shared parking. Further, parking could not be shared across Buck Jones Road, and this will replace distance requirements from the LDO. And for any shared parking, appropriate justifications would be required to be submitted during the time of development plan review. And that would include looking at the use and the time of use for these particular uses to make sure that sharing of parking does not occur across uses that need parking at the same times of day. Parking deck screening will be required for parking deck facades. The highest requirements will apply to facades that are fronting and facing Buck Jones Road, US 1, and Nottingham Drive. Screening for these decks will include architectural facade screens integrated into the building design or wrapped or concealed by other buildings. All other parking deck facades will be screened by either green screens or vegetated walls, as seen in the picture here, or art or architectural screens, as seen in the other picture. South Hills is proposing to develop and implement transportation demand management. This is a type of project or program that will be the first in Cary to actively engage in this area. The goal of transportation demand management is to use a combination of services and built infrastructure designed to reduce the demand for single occupancy vehicular travel and to promote alternative modes of transportation such as walking, cycling, carpooling, telecommuting, and public transit. Due to the nature of transportation demand management relying on services and programs, we anticipate that much of the program will be enforced through a forthcoming development agreement, but have requested that it be referenced as part of the rezoning since assumptions of the traffic study were made based on the use of a transportation demand management program in operation for the site. As part of the development, a supplemental traffic analysis will be performed for each of the 3 subdistricts to assess the need for improvements associated with that subdistrict. The applicant team has developed a transportation improvements table as a sheet of the preliminary development plan, which preliminarily identifies some of the transportation improvement, and the analysis for each subdistrict will be performed prior to approval of any development plan approval that would occur within that particular subdistrict. And this will allow us and staff and the applicant to work together over time to ensure that adequate transportation infrastructure is accommodated. Community gathering area will also be governed by subdistrict. So the applicant has committed to an overall minimum requirement for community gathering area of 60,000 square feet, which, as I noted, is about 1.5 acres. This exceeds Cary's minimum requirement of 5,000 square feet. They're proposing that gathering area be established and regulated by subdistrict, and that 20,000 square feet of gathering area will be provided for each subdistrict. And within that, within each subdistrict, there will be a major community gathering area that's at least 10,000 square feet. The subdistricts will also regulate the timing and phasing for community gathering areas. And then within that, the applicants are proposing for any gathering area that's 10,000 square feet or larger, that a portion of that will be permeable area. While the site was developed before Cary's current stormwater requirements were in place and would likely not be required to add traditional stormwater devices that are typically seen in greenfield development, The applicant has proposed to include custom requirements, which would include a post-construction stormwater management plan with peak flow reduction at a specific point on Walnut Creek that was determined not to negatively impact flooding conditions downstream, and a commitment that each subdistrict of the plan achieve a targeted nitrogen reduction through the use of green stormwater infrastructure. As part of the district development standards, the applicants are proposing that the standards within this document will replace the requirements of Cary's Community Appearance Manual. The Cary's Community Appearance Manual regulates building materials, architecture, and design for buildings, so the standards, again, will replace that document. And they are proposing alternative standards to address design and architecture. Notably, the district development standards propose a material list that substantially varies from the standard masonry requirements of the Community Appearance Manual. Examples of alternative materials are listed here. This variation will allow for buildings to have different appearances, perhaps unique to the South Hills district, and not necessarily consistent with other major projects in Cary. The applicant is proposing modifications to Cary's sign ordinance. They have designated 2 sign zones to distinguish between their modifications. Sign zone 1 is this sign zone that's shown in this salmon color here. It is intended for areas that are visible from the major thoroughfares such as Buck Jones Road, US 1, Nottingham Drive, so any building that's kind of fronting the roads that are exterior to the site. Generally, signs within Sign Zone 1 would follow Cary's current ordinance, so they would be governed by Cary's current standards. The applicants are seeking most of their modifications within Sign Zone 2. So Sign Zone 2 represents the interior portion of the site, so not necessarily visible from the exterior roads. And within that, they're proposing some variation for ground floor retail signs, as well as limited amounts of movie screens, digital advertising, neon signage. And specifically, their standards are proposing 4 tiers of signs that will include requirements for entry monuments, ground level activated uses, wall signage, and vehicular-oriented and pedestrian-oriented directional signs. Pedestrian entry monuments, which could also be obelisk, could include the project name, and they would be located at entry points along greenways, pedestrian ways, and gathering areas. Most flexibility will be permitted for ground level tenants within Sign Zone 2. Again, this is the area that's kind of interior to the site and not necessarily as visible from the exterior roads. They're proposing allowances for painted signs, such as the example that we see here, illuminated cabinet signs, and then also allowances for digital parking deck signage. The reuse and redevelopment provision allows for the reuse of existing buildings within subdistricts 2 and 3 to be used and to remain as long as certain criteria are met, such as no increase in the overall square footage. It also permits temporary pop-up structures, and there's no limitations on the duration of the reuse. The applicant has proposed customized streetscapes. This will include streetscape width variation, and plantings will include native trees, and other features will be in the streetscape to include seating, trash receptacles, bike racks. This differs from Cary's streetscape requirements, which are generally mostly planting areas, but perhaps this proposal is more appropriate for an urban mixed-use development design. There are also limited champion trees on the site, and the applicant proposes the removal of the trees. They have proposed, however, to delay the removal of the trees on the west side until a development plan has been submitted. The PDP will also reduce the highway corridor buffer width from, it could range now between 50 to 100 feet. They will reduce it to 30 feet. In addition to that, the applicant is also voluntarily offering a buffer, which is not required by the LDO, adjacent to residential uses to the west. So the LDO recognizes that for mixed-use projects such as this, flexibility is needed from Cary's land development ordinance. It provides that in order to seek compliance with Cary's community plan and achieve alternative design standards. So I'm going to run through some of the alternative design standards that they're proposing. These include standards that are different with regard to vehicular gates. They're proposing that vehicular gates be allowed for residential uses. They're also proposing modifications to the parking rate, which I've already talked through, as well as shared parking. They're proposing that community gathering area be required per district instead of per development plan, so looking at it more of like a district-wide approach. And changes to Cary's highway corridor buffer. Again, I also talked through the streetscape changes. They're proposing to change it from a more just planted permeable area to more of an urban streetscape, and the removal of champion trees. Continuing on, they are proposing alternative design standards for buildings, and that's when I talked about the changes to the Cary Community Appearance Manual. They're also proposing a change to traffic study requirements so that no quasi-judicial approval would be required if development happens within 15 years of rezoning approval. Our ordinance requires a 2-year limitation, and they're anticipating that the build-out of a site of this size could take more years than that, so they're increasing that to 15 years. We also have on our adopted roadway proposed road to eventually go from the site over US 1. The ultimate location of the site has not yet been determined, and of course accommodation for a road such as this going over a highway could be fairly impactful to the site. So they are requesting a modification to accommodate right-of-way for this road going over US 1. And then of course they are also proposing alternative standards for signage, which I just walked through. So this concludes the overview of the rezoning request. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our analysis with the Cary Community Plan. Then after that, I'll wrap it up and turn it over to the applicant to give their justification. So based on our review, we found that the case furthers policies within the live, work, shape, engage, and move chapters. I'll talk through some of those. So overall, the proposed development will allow for a vertically integrated mixed-use project arranged in a small and connected block network with ample pedestrian and bicycle accommodations. The mix of uses and the density are generally consistent with the destination center. The project proposes appropriate transitions through building height variation, proposing the tallest buildings to be adjacent to the highway, and reducing the height adjacent to existing residential uses to the west. They are also proposing the use of natural buffers adjacent to the residential uses to the west, and then a natural buffer also adjacent to the highway to the east. When we look at the live chapter, we note that their proposal will increase housing options within a destination center in alignment with policy 2 of the live chapter. Addressing policy 3, they're also emphasizing placing higher density housing near transit stops, shopping areas, services, office buildings within a destination center, so this meets that policy guidance. Additionally, the policy contributes to addressing policy 6 by incorporating workforce housing for 5% of renters with incomes not exceeding 80% of the area median income, and this commitment is valid for 30 years. The proposal responds to policies found within the work chapter by providing diverse workplace locations in an environment that caters to the need of modern businesses and workers. The inclusion of taller buildings along the highway serves as a gateway into Cary, enhancing the visual appeal and prominence of the destination center. This aligns with Policy 2's objectives of creating attractive and competitive locations for businesses and workers, as well as Policy 10's emphasis on mixed-use, walkable environments. Incorporating research and development uses within the destination center also further enhances its appeal to businesses seeking innovative and collaborative work environments. The proposal also directly addresses shop chapter guidance through the redevelopment and revitalization of an aging shopping center. This aligns with the preference for revitalizing older centers into more vibrant destinations rather than developing new commercial centers. The reuse and redevelopment provision allows for the reuse of buildings within Subdistrict 2 and 3. This will help to address work and shop policies by allowing continued use of existing buildings, but could also lead to the existing form to remain in place indefinitely within those defined subdistricts. Bike and pedestrian accommodations along Buck Jones Road will tie ultimately into Walnut Creek Greenway's corridor, and the proposed pedestrian way and shared use path along the eastern perimeter of the site provide additional bike and pedestrian connections within the site, all furthering policies found within the Engage chapter, which includes the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Facilities Master Plan. The provision for charging stations and pedestrian, bicycle, and transit accommodations will help to mitigate overall emissions. This rezoning also proposes to remove champion trees identified on the site that will delay removal of the trees within Subdistrict 3. They've also proposed to add a buffer adjacent to residential uses to the west, where no buffer is currently required by the LDO, and develop planting standards for new trees within buffers and streetscapes on the site. The site is addressing several move policies through the provision of a grid network with pedestrian and bicycle accommodations. The project is also developing a transportation demand management program representing a managed approach to addressing traffic congestion. And the project has built-in phasing points for the inclusion of supplemental traffic analysis linked to each subdistrict. And this will allow Cary staff and the applicant to evaluate traffic improvements throughout the duration of the project development. The neighborhood meeting for the case was held last year on June 7th of 2023. There were 15 property owners that attended. There were questions and concerns regarding stormwater, drainage and flooding in the area, and affordable housing availability. Staff has received one call or one email after the public hearing publication was sent in April. And at the public hearing, which occurred in April 25th of this year, there was one public hearing comment that was submitted in written form regarding concern over traffic and pedestrian safety within the area and nearby neighborhood. Council questions and feedback included questions regarding proposed signage, transportation demand management, bus stop locations, and affordable housing. Since the public hearing, the applicant has made some changes to their application, and I'll share that in general, the concepts have remained the same. What they worked on mostly has been around clarification and enforceability of some of the existing commitments. So they've added the phasing commitments, which I have shared with you tonight, the sub-districts that have been proposed, so linking improvements to those sub-districts. They did remove a development pod, but this doesn't necessarily change the layout and the shape of what they're proposing. So the area highlighted in red at the very top was identified previously as a developable pod. That's since been removed. So the number of pods has been reduced by one, but the overall layout has not actually changed. They've changed the approach to EV charging to a ratio rather than per deck. Previously, they were proposing spaces to be constructed per parking deck. Now it's per number of parking spaces. They've committed to a transit hub and additional details associated with that. They provided more specificity on their stormwater commitment, specifically to be site-specific in this case. They've adjusted their parking rate for multifamily dwellings and further refined their shared parking provisions and changed their approach to early activation to more of a reuse and redevelopment approach tied to certain sub-districts. So with that, staff's preliminary finding is that the rezoning is consistent with the Cary Community Plan. We find that the plan or the proposal supports policies found in the Live, Work, Shop, Shape, Engage, Move, and Serve chapters. We also note that the proposed redevelopment or the proposed rezoning supports the redevelopment of an aging shopping center within a destination center, which furthers policies from both the SHAPE chapter as well as shop and work as well. So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to the applicant, Jason Barron from Morningstar Law Group, to give a justification for the request, and following that, I'll be available for questions.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Is this on? Okay, good. Could only hear myself. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group. Here on behalf of the applicant, Loden Properties, joining me tonight is Henry Ward as the applicant's representative, and we're here to answer any questions. Also, David Green with Arup. It has been his artful hand and urban planning expertise that has gone into this incredibly exciting development project, which candidly is the coolest thing that I've worked on in my 20-plus years of doing what I do for a living. Before I get started on some high-level observations associated with the case, I just want to point out a couple of things. First, I want to thank the staff. This has been over 2 years in the making. Our first meeting on this proposal that you're seeing tonight happened more than 24 months ago. Our first meeting with the town happened more than 2 years ago. And in between then and now, it's been literally hundreds of hours of meetings with the staff to carefully create the materials that are before you tonight, recognizing that what the applicant was working on in the private sector, as well as what the town is working on in the public sector with the proposed center, needed to be artfully created, needed to be well thought out, and needed to complement each other. And we're excited at the work that's gone into it, and we're really appreciative of the work that the staff has done. It has been a yeoman's effort indeed. And what you see before you tonight is reflective of a development that that the town hasn't seen before, and I'll talk a little bit about that. From a big picture standpoint, and I was trying to figure out if I could capture how many zoning cases I've handled in the 22 years that I've been doing this type of work, but it's in the hundreds for sure. Every single zoning case that I've worked on has been about use. A client has come to me and said, I've got a shopping center that I want to develop on X parcel. We need to go get it rezoned. I've got 2 apartment buildings with a couple of out parcels that I need to develop. Let's go get it rezoned. At no point during this process has this applicant talked about use. It's always been about creating something unique, creating a block structure that focuses on the pedestrian experience. It has really been enlightening, refreshing, and challenging all at the same time, because as we've been working with the staff through this evolutionary process of creating the plans that are before you tonight, there hasn't been a point where my client has raised his hand and said, whoa, wait a minute. We've got an apartment deal that would be jeopardized if we make this change. It has all been highly collaborative and has really been built around creating a unique, authentic pedestrian experience at South Hills. And it's South Hills. This isn't just another piece of dirt. It's an incredible piece of dirt. You know, for people who have been doing what we do, for folks like you all who hear zoning cases at the Planning and Zoning Board, we've seen the amazing things that have been going on in Cary. We know where kind of the next big sites are. We've seen the Green Level West Destination Center. We've seen the Fenton rezoning. We've always known that South Hills was going to be coming along at some point. And we always knew that South Hills had to be special. It had to be something out of the ordinary. I don't think we ever could have anticipated it would be this extraordinary. And that's a testament to David Green and Henry's work on this. But it's an incredibly exciting opportunity, and I consider myself fortunate, candidly, to have been able to work on this and to be able to present it to you tonight. The concept, as Katie mentioned during her presentation, is to create small block pattern, highly walkable, highly interconnected. It's designed to get people out of their cars. It's to create, you know, we hear these concepts all the time, you know, live, work, and play. We want to create live, work, and play. This does so much more than that. What this does is create durable, long-lasting block structure that will be able to stand the test of time. You'll be able to put in infrastructure associated with this development, and as uses redevelop, we won't have to experience South Hills here ever again. You won't have a use-specific block that's been created that is going to have to it's going to have to sit destitute for an extended period of time before the money makes sense to go in and move all the utilities that support that. What this is doing is actually creating an urban framework that will be durable, so that as over the course of time, as uses change, as block patterns develop, you'll be able to easily interchange to remove what's there and replace it without having to go through the really tough process of watching, like, again, South Hills is a great example of it, of watching a shopping center which was built for a specific purpose die so that it can become something else. Now, from a private development standpoint, this is a first of its kind, certainly in the town of Cary, but definitely in this market as well. It's a first of its kind approach to how development should work. Again, it's less to do with use and more to do with how do we create a unique experience, an authentic experience, an exceptional experience for people that are going to be visiting there, that are going to be living there, and that are going to be working there. It's a first of its kind on the private development side. However, it's a centuries-old urban planning concept. We see it in every city that you visit across the world, right? All these major cities that you've gone to, Boston, New York, Paris, Philadelphia, they're all built on this block grid structure that has been durable. It's withstood the test of time. As redevelopment has occurred in those places, you haven't had to see blight strike those downtown areas, those uptown areas, those Manhattans, in order for redevelopment to occur. And that's fundamentally the concept that is going on with South Hills. And again, it is a centuries-old, proven experience in how to create livable places for people to be. All of that is embodied in a development standards document. So the development standards are essentially the zoning for this case. Having worked on this and worked with Katie and the rest of the team through the course of this 2 years process, the development standards has grown, and then it's shrunk, and then it's grown again. But it is essentially a zoning document in and of itself. And as you've probably seen in your staff report, there's a lot to it. It is essentially creating the entire zoning framework for this development. And the reason why, not surprisingly, is the town's land development ordinance is not really set up for urban development. It's the town of Cary. I love the town of Cary, but it's fairly suburban. The LDO is reflective of suburban development patterns, and this is anything but that. As Katie mentioned, and I'm going to try to keep my comments fairly brief. As Katie mentioned, there is a pedestrian way that runs through the middle of the site. So this is it runs north and south, adjacent to Buck Jones Road. That is going to be the nucleus of activity. That is where the core of the experience is going to be within the development itself. And that's when Katie was talking about the primary active uses. A commitment associated with the zoning case is the ground level experience along that pedestrian way is going to have those primary active uses. It's going to have your cafes, your plazas, your shopping opportunities. That will be kind of the lifeblood of the experience. And so everything that's kind of built around it is designed to create energy within that pedestrian way. That pedestrian way feeds into the blocks where ultimately we believe the center will be located. And just for your edification, the planning associated with this contemplates that the center would occupy these blocks in here. And so the pedestrian way feeds through it seamlessly, complements what the town is working on, and then ultimately extends into the remainder of the subdistricts. Not surprisingly, for a development of its type, bike and ped connections have been at the forefront of conversation really from the outset. Not only internal to the site, and as you've seen in your staff report and the presentation that Katie gave, there are bike lanes and separated bike lanes and on-street bike lanes littered throughout the development, but also beyond the development. This is going to be highly interconnected with what the town is already working on. We have planned for a greenway connection that will essentially line the eastern boundary of the site adjacent to US 1. We'll be working with the town to tie that into the Walnut Creek Greenway connection that is going to be made hopefully sooner rather than later. As you all are probably aware, that Walnut Creek Greenway will connect South Hills to Fenton, and ultimately to downtown. Highly exciting to be able to think about somebody being able to live at South Hills, be able to hop on their bike or their Lime bike, their scooter, whatever the case may be, and head into downtown and vice versa. Additionally, as Katie mentioned, there is a planned pedestrian connection across US 1. And we've been working with DOT. We've had a lot of meetings with DOT to understand how that connection could occur. And we are contemplating that connection will occur. We're going to accommodate it as part of our development, but that will ultimately link this site to Crossroads. And so, again, from a multimodal connection standpoint, from a taking people off of the road, giving them options to be able to move around to where people want to go. They want to go to Crossroads, they want to go to South Hills, they want to go to Fenton, they want to go to downtown. The thinking that's gone into creating this and making sure it is well connected has been fairly extraordinary. In that regard, and the SERVE chapter has policies that talk about a number of things, and we've made commitments with respect to EV parking stations, and there's commitments with respect to a variety of things related to stormwater from a macro standpoint. This development is a highly environmentally sensitive development because of the development pattern itself. Again, from a macro standpoint, this is how you want to build because you're reducing auto dependency. You're significantly reducing the likelihood that somebody's going to get in their car to whether it's go to downtown or go to the center or go to shop here. So from a macro standpoint, these type of dense, walkable, connected urban developments are in and of themselves a testament to a community that is keenly aware of making sure that as development occurs, we want to do so in an environmentally thoughtful way. The last thing that I'll say, and you've seen the staff's analysis, we believe that this case fits squarely with the recommendations of the Cary Community Plan. I can't find a policy that speaks to this type of development that we're not covering completely through this development concept. I think it's going to be an exciting development. It will be developed over the course of several years. As Katie mentioned, we anticipate it's probably going to be at least 15 years before the entirety of the development occurs. And just for your edification, this isn't in the documents themselves, but the first phase of development will essentially be everything on the east side of Buck Jones. Where are we? South of Nottingham. So the first phase of development, hopefully including the center here, will occur in this general area. The second phase will occur on the east side of Buck Jones, on the north side of Nottingham, and then the last phase will occur on the west side of Buck Jones. You probably saw something in your development standards and in the staff report related to reuse and reactivation. We've been working on some really exciting concepts related to being able to reuse. You may be familiar, there's an old car dealership that's located on this site. Henry and his team have been working closely with some potential tenants of that to do some cool things that will be highly complementary to what's going on the east side of Buck Jones. And, and not surprisingly, given the role that the center plays in all of this, we've been choreographing our development, whether through the pedestrian way, through the reuse and reactivation of the areas that we're going to wait to develop for some time from a new construction standpoint. We've been thoughtful about making sure that the uses that are coming online are going to be complementary to what the town is doing with their development of the center. And so with that, we're here to answer any questions that you all may have. We hope you agree that this is the type of development that we want at the town of Cary. It's the type of excellence that when the town does something, and you know this, and I said it at the public hearing, I'm proud to work in this town if for no other reason than when the town of Cary does something on their own. When they do something publicly, they demand excellence of themselves. And this is the type of development. This is a private developer who's accepted that challenge. And at each turn, the development has gotten better through the iterative process that we've gone through in working with the staff. And we think this is going to be an excellent development. It will be representative of the type of excellence that Cary expects and ultimately will be consistent with the Cary Community Plan. So with that, we're here to answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
All right, so this concludes the presentation. Happy to
Okay,
answer any questions.
thank you. So now is the time for board members to ask their questions of the applicant and staff. I'll start off. The parking, remind me, a couple of years ago, we clarified parking regulations, and we, hate to use the word lowered, but we did. They were probably too demanding, then we adjusted them. So this is really a request to adjust the adjustment from our standpoint, right? Because if you look at the community plan, we're asking to lower it, right? And the parking that we've talked about, is this really thinking about, this is everything, the residents that would be there, people that would be coming there? I appreciate that once you get there, there's all that walkability, that's awesome, but nobody takes public transportation in Cary. Now, hopefully in the future that will change, but they don't take it today. So people are going to have to drive to get there, the way it looks today. So is that including in this, or are we really looking at for the residents? I'm not sure what the parking is for.
Yeah, happy to speak to that. So yes, so Chair, you are correct. A few years ago, we did adjust our rates for multifamily parking, and the rates that we're looking at here are for multifamily parking. They are looking to adjust that further. They're not proposing adjustments to parking for other uses on the site. They're looking primarily at that multifamily. When we adjusted our rates a few years ago, it was based on studies of Cary parking needs. So we actually had a consultant go out and look at parking usage within town of Cary development specifically. So we do anticipate that this site will be, behave slightly different than some of the other suburban multifamily sites within Cary. So the parking rates that they're proposing are more in line with some of the parking rates that we have now for downtown parking for multifamily sites. So it's somewhat consistent with those already set rates that we currently have in our town center area, but slightly lower than what we're seeing in other parts of Cary.
But for me to come to downtown Cary, which is awesome to do, I have to drive to come to downtown Cary, and we're currently building a wonderful, badly needed parking deck. So that's my only comment here is I know it's early. We don't know how many people will be coming there, but I think if we think too much about, you can, Jason, if we think too much about public access, that little bit worries me.
Sure, that's fair. And as I do want to focus on one thing. The parking for all of the uses not named multifamily is going to be consistent with the land development ordinance. Now, there's a shared parking concept that is wired into this that will require justification and working with the staff to be able to make sure that we're being efficient with those. But to your point, if you'd be driving to South Hills because you want to go to a restaurant that's over there, or there's a retailer that you want to go to, we're going to be parking those consistent with land development ordinance that exists today.
So really, we're talking more about the multifamily
That's
when we
exactly
talk
right.
about,
Yep.
I know you don't like to use this word reduction, but we're really, and then you're going to work out later what the parking's going to be for activity centers, retail, or is that cooked into the plan today?
Yeah, the plan contemplates shared parking. Now, the existing LDO allows for shared parking up to a particular percentage. We're seeking to increase that percentage from a staff approval standpoint. That requires us to be able to submit to the staff essentially a report that analyzes the demand, the uses that are planned associated with that, and how that sharing works. And there's a lot of uses that share with each other very, very well. There's some uses that don't, and that will be meted out throughout the process and the development process. I think one of the things that the life of this development will allow us to do, and the way this document has been created, is to be able to study how is the first phase of development going, so that when we get to phase 2, how can we plan for that? But long story short, from day one, the LDO standards for everything not named multifamily that exists today will exist and apply to development of phase 1.
But we're still asking for a reduction for parking.
For the
That's one of
multifamily. And again, the multifamily is a reduction from the LDO standard outside of some of the downtown districts. And that's what, Katie, I think you were mentioning. For instance, the downtown HMXD district, what we're proposing is in excess of what that requirement would be.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
Absolutely. We're talking about the center be located, assuming it's approved by the voters.
Yeah, Yeah, let me pull up a slide showing the network, and I'll find it out. So the center, the planning for the center currently would accommodate these blocks that are located here, just south of the Nottingham Drive extension. And as Jason was pointing out earlier, there is the pedestrian way that runs north-south through the site. So the planning for the center would be, the center kind of fronting on that pedestrian way, taking advantage of that activity that would occur with pedestrian bicyclists and the retail location just to the north and the south. And of course, as you know, the center is placed on the 2024 bond referendum, so we'll know the outcome of that in November. And this development proposal can work with or without the center, the way it's developed. So as you can see, they're currently showing that if the center doesn't go here, you could develop up to 3 blocks essentially in the area. If the center were to be approved by the bond and then we were to move forward with it, then there's an allowance to merge some of the blocks for civic use such as the center.
Is that a condition or part of the PDP? If the center is approved, it will go there. Is that a
The
condition?
location is not specifically set, but within the PDP, they do have an allowance to merge some of the blocks for civic uses. So if the center were to move forward, they would be able to merge some of the blocks. But we've not identified specifically where the center would be located.
So there's nothing, so the developer could, if the bond goes through, decide not to allow this center to go there. There's nothing that is in writing that says location-ish.
Yeah, not with the rezoning per se.
Okay.
There's probably going to be a forthcoming development agreement that would tie down some of those elements that would be outside of what you would see in a rezoning approval. Development agreement would probably cover the land for the center, like the exact acreage, where it would go, the purchase of the land, also infrastructure improvements, things like that. But that would be separate from the zoning.
Not, well, again, but not if the land use we see it should be for the civic and we have the vote coming up. Again, there's nothing that guarantees, yes, there could be an agreement, but if we're talking land use, there's nothing that says it would be located within this zoning area per se.
Not in this particular case. Jason,
Yeah, if I could just chime in on that point, there will be a development agreement if the bond is approved. We've been working with the town's attorneys, to work on the terms of that development agreement for months now. So that will absolutely be part and parcel. Beyond that, so it's not a product of the zoning. There's going to be a development agreement that runs parallel that carries with it a number of other things that are outside of the zoning but are important to the development. Beyond that, my client is crazy excited to have the town be on the development. I mean, and as you could probably imagine, if you've been over there, that's the best dirt at South Hills, and that's where the town is going to go. And so I think that's representative of my client's belief that the town is going to be a great tenant to that facility. And so that development agreement will certainly be part of that process. Knock on wood, hopefully the bond passes. Yep.
No, here's the whole thing. My concern, I'm taking a look at it, is what happens if your client magically disappears? Don't want that to happen, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying what protects the town should things fall apart? And that's what I'm trying, that's the what-if case that I'm asking to make sure that the use does go with what is the intention of the town of Cary, regardless if your client is involved or not. So that's the reason I'm being very specific with these.
Sure.
In case things go not the way we all imagine.
So I have two responses there. One is the market economics associated with the deal. Finding a better tenant than the town of Cary would be in this location, given the nature of this particular use, would be really challenging. Two, and I'll defer to Mr. Pence, who's the town's attorney, but the town could always condemn the land as well. Certainly don't want to go there, but if the town approves the bond, the town has condemnation authority for things like this. And so I'll leave that to Mr. Pence, though. He's the town's lawyer, I'm not.
I was waiting for Jason to stop talking so I could come up here and say exactly that. He is right. So if there are concerns about whether or not the town can obtain that property, the town does have condemnation authority, and obviously that would be something none of us would want to have to execute in this scenario, and but it's on the table. And again, I think it's important to remind the board that, remember, we always talk about we can't think about ownership, which is what you're doing. You're doing exactly what we've asked you to do. You can't think about ownership as it relates to rezoning because we don't know. We obviously hope that this is the developer that will actually do this and that something will not happen that will cause them to go away. But you can't think like that. But at the same time, because we can't think about ownership, we've got to think about the options that this is providing. And if you all, again, if there's a condition that would somehow require the center to be in that location, if that rises to the level of what tips the scale for you one way or the other for consistency or not consistency, then we can talk about that. But if it's not to that level, then we should move on and rely on either our condemnation authority or a development agreement or something else to assuage those concerns should they arise in the future.
Now, again, there's a lot of moving pieces to this. That's only one. Let's assume the center is going to go in there. Does that impact the set-asides for the community space? That is a condition. In other words, it's going to be in phase one. They have 20,000 feet. The center is going to have a lot of open space. So does that space account for? Is it in addition to? What does that mean?
Yeah, so the center will certainly be providing some community gathering space, absolutely. And the way they've set it up would be, if the center provides community gathering space, that would count towards the overall commitment. I don't know if it would count for all of the community gathering space within the site. We'd have to take a look and see the square footage. As you can see, they had specific breakdowns per sub-district, but certainly any open space at the community gathering area that the center provided could count towards that.
Right. The shared parking and gated. Shared parking, great. Gated makes sense because you have to protect, where people are living, and being able to have, they seem at odds with each other. It just, and I don't know how do you mechanically in a condition protect both when they seem to conflict?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we'd have to get into the specifics of that at the time of development plan review. So for example, if a residential use wanted to share with an adjacent office building, and those potentially could be good candidates for sharing, because sometimes, people are not at home, not at their house during the day when office workers are there. So that could be a potential option. We would have to look at the specifics, like, are they using a gate? That they would have to have the parking available for the office workers during the day. We would look at the hours of operation for both to find out when the parking spaces would be in use, and then ultimately shared parking agreements would be recorded as well. So it's a document that would be binding between both entities and enforceable by the town as well. So we would definitely have to review the specifics of that.
Would the shared parking, that can be accounted for, how much of the minimum requirement that's required for the multi-house use. Mm-hmm. So how is that? Here you have the shared parking, 70% can be accounted for shared parking. How does that tie into the multifamily exactly?
It could be built upon. So they're proposing a multifamily parking rate, and that, we went over that, so that'll be their rate. And then in addition to that, if they want to accommodate for sharing parking, they could also do that as well. But again, the justifications would have to be submitted, and we would have to get into the specifics of, do these actually qualify for shared parking? Do they meet the requirements? And then it would need to be recorded as an enforceable document.
Another point to clear is there's some DOT work that is coming, likely, possibly, I'm more concerned with the buffers along the highways and how does that impact the buffers? Because it made it sound like if things had to be rearranged and moved around to accommodate DOT, that those buffers along the highway would go to zero. That's how it made it sound. Did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, so I'll start, and then I'll let the applicant chime in, too. I know they've had a number of conversations with DOT. So you're correct, there is a pending DOT project along this area that would change the intersection, or change the interchanges getting in and out of the crossroads area. So pretty different highway configuration. The ultimate right-of-way needs for that work are not yet determined, from what I understand, but it could require that a portion of the property for the South Hills be taken for right-of-way needs. Now, I know that the applicant they've committed to a 30-foot highway corridor buffer. The ordinance does talk about, sometimes DOT needs to take some of that for right-of-way needs as well. So if that happens, that highway corridor buffer could be less than 30 feet. I know that the applicant has also been talking to DOT about, the opportunity to use some of the right-of-way area to also make up for that, but that would be outside of the limits of this project. But probably worth just talking a little bit, just for the sake of understanding of how that would play out. But that's essentially, just to reframe, it would be 30 feet, and then the DOT project could potentially shave off some of that, so it could be less ultimately. We just don't know what that width will be yet.
Yeah, these are great questions, and they really are, and I appreciate them. We've been meeting for over a year with DOT as well to understand the impacts of their development, and we've been working with them to make sure that as we plan things like buffers and the greenway and buildings, certainly, whether it's the center or on the private development side, that we're not doing anything that's going to jeopardize the functionality of the development. Obviously, and Katie's exactly right, DOT can't tell us where the right-of-way is going to go. They don't know yet. They have an idea of where it's going to go, but they don't know. Neither have that's not fair to them, DOT, if you're listening. They have a general idea, but they can't tell you with specificity exactly where it's going to go. We have comfort associated with how it's been constructed, that if DOT beats us to the punch, like if they get out in front of us and they go ahead and condemn right away, say within the next 9 months, year, whenever it happens to be, that the flexibility has been built into this document to allow us to put in the 30 feet, put in the greenway, do all of the things that we want to do. If it's after the fact, we're going to be working with DOT, and theoretically it could shrink, but that's true for every buffer everywhere when we're dealing with DOT.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Couple of the signage questions and colors that came up and relief thereof. One of the things with Cary is keeping things, I'll say, coordinated and complementary, and understanding they want the urban vibe. One of the things it said is for the signage that it would be mostly in Zone 2, which gives the appearance that it could be in sign Zone 1, as far as the allowances in the PDP. It's the word, okay, thank you. So I just want to make sure it's not being interpreted that way, that all of the...
Any color variation would only be allowed within sign Zone 1, or sign Zone 2, excuse me, the
Okay.
interior portion of the site.
All right.
Good question.
Yeah, just because it said mostly, and I'm like, okay, mostly can mean a lot of things. All right, I'll probably have more, but
Could
Could I piggyback
Yeah,
on some of the
go ahead.
signage
Yeah, certainly.
questions? Because I had a few of those. I think we talked a little bit about painted murals and things like that, and that was a sign Zone 2.
Yes.
And I definitely understand the sign Zone 1 up against the residential to the west on the western side of Buck Jones. But was there a reason, things like that, we didn't want along Buck Jones?
Yeah, so generally murals are allowed anywhere, and that's something that we see throughout Cary, and can go to our Public Art Advisory Board, and something that we love to see. Whenever a mural starts to include signage, so the one that we're looking at here, tacos, food, like once you start to incorporate elements of sign, or if you see a picture of a taco, then it starts to change from a mural to a sign. And then we have to classify the whole thing as a sign. So, so if they were to have like painted graphics like this, that would be considered a sign. But, you know, if there are murals that are incorporated, you know, that could be, you know, throughout the site, just as long as it doesn't have the signage portion on it.
Is that all you?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a concept of a transit hub that was described, and I just was curious, there's a laundry list of things related to that. You know, something as little as a sign or as meaningful as a, you know, a bus stop or whatever the variation between the two. Is there some minimum level of commitment to it being a transit hub? Like, what are we getting at with the transit hub designation that we, you know, that we spoke to there in the presentation? And what do we really want to accomplish?
Yeah, so a transit hub is something that's a little more robust than a transit stop. So it could require an area of road where the bus can pull off and sit for a period of time, like while it's waiting to get back on schedule, or you know, something like that. So so it could require additional area that's needed, and then the amenities with the transit hub generally would be more robust. So like in this picture, you see a shaded waiting area. There's some digital signage that's associated with it. So an area that's more comfortable for users to wait at. So there will also be transit stops within and adjacent to the site, but they committed to at least one transit hub, which will give us the ability to know that we'll have at least one spot where it'll be more robust and be able to accommodate more of like a regional type of transit stop. And we feel like one transit hub may be all that's needed for this site, but there's the ability for us to add an additional one if needed during the development plan review.
Right, thank you. This is a really basic question, but the general commercial designation that it has today, the primary differences would be what? Building height? I mean, just contrasting and, you know, what could be done with what we have today as far as it's zoned, you know, versus where we're going with this more modern, you know, urban development. Just trying to contrast and I remembered this slide for sure, but.
Yeah, so general commercial allows a big list of uses, some of which are urban mixed-use type of uses, some of which are more suburban in nature and could require a bigger footprint for parking and circulation. So just to give a few examples of something that may not be as urban would be something like a car wash, which would require ample vehicular circulation, drive-through area, like vacuuming stations, things like that. Vehicle filling station, that'd be a gas station. Vehicle service, so like auto repair, things like that. So there are a number of uses that are, urban, mixed-use nature uses, but then there's also a number of uses that are more suburban style uses. And by rezoning it to mixed-use district, they're whittling that the list of uses pretty far down. So you wouldn't see like vehicle service uses listed, car washes, things like that. That would eliminate a lot of those more suburban style uses.
But really, the question is, today there would be limitations on building height. What are we gaining with the rezoning primarily that affects the success of this development, I guess is maybe what I was trying to get at.
So they are requesting much taller building heights.
Right.
And then, of course, the ability to share parking, which will allow for uses to be closer together, the structured parking decks, things like that. Jason?
Yeah, and in general commercial, we wouldn't be permitted to do multifamily. We wouldn't be able to permitted to do any residential. Research and development uses wouldn't be permitted in the general commercial districts. So that's something that is permitted as part of this process and is contemplated as part of the rezoning case. So there's some use variation that's part and parcel to it, and there's also some obviously modifications with respect to the styles of those uses.
Right, gotcha. No, that's great. And I think the only other piece that sort of stuck out to me is obviously we've got this other, if it's called a destination center, where Crossroads is today and this connectivity to the two. What's the level of, I mean, there's all this regulatory things that have to happen, approval and whatnot, but the level of commitment, is that a public-private? Who's responsible ultimately if the DOT, whoever allows you to build connectivity over to Crossroads and expanding that greenway, how does that really get done and, you know, financially, who's responsible for that?
That would certainly be a, multi-jurisdictional effort to build a greenway over US 1. So it's shown on, this is our adopted map, so you can see the greenway is shown over, US 1 now, connecting it ultimately down to the south, to the crossroads area. But yeah, it would require coordination from, DOT, Town of Cary, the property owners, both for South Hills as well as the Crossroads, property owners, and then, of course, funding as well. So it would definitely be a pretty significant effort.
And I guess
Probably
the
a
key
public
point there is that's not it's obviously not a condition, but it's also not something that's expected of the developer. It's a much larger, effort that would be more collaborative in scope. I mean,
That's
it would be
correct.
nice to have, but it's really not germane or committed as a result of whatever rezoning happens here.
Correct. We would be looking for like accommodation of the landing pad and an area during development plan review, but the actual construction, right, would be outside of the scope of this project.
One quick question, just to piggyback
Yeah.
on that. I thought in an earlier slide, maybe I misread it, but I thought at first it was called a street connection. Now I'm hearing greenway. Is it
There is
just
that,
pedestrian?
too.
I heard both, too.
There is that too.
There is
There's
that, too.
also a street connection shown on our adopted roadway widths map as well.
For the same location?
Same location.
Okay.
And the applicants are proposing a modification to not have to accommodate that. Obviously, a street connection would be much more impactful to the site, and so that is an area where they are requesting a modification from that.
Okay, so they're wanting to remove that and make it a pedestrian only?
Yes.
Okay.
So going off that, can I just, quick
Yeah.
question?
And I'm done,
Jeff,
I'm
are
done
you-
with questions as
I don't
well.
want to.
Thank you.
So I was thinking Buck Jones Road, kind of love the scale of this, very pedestrian friendly, it's great. Buck Jones, crossing Buck Jones, because we're kind of connecting the two sides, there's a lot of residential on Nottingham Drive. What are some of the things you guys are potentially considering to make the pedestrian crossing safer and more people-friendly than just cars going up that Buck Jones and at crazy speed sometimes?
Yeah.
So is that something that you were talking to developer about, or is that something the town of Cary is thinking about?
Yeah, certainly. The applicants team are proposing customized cross-sections for Buck Jones Road. Those will include bicycle accommodations as well as pedestrian accommodations. And what were you specifically asking about the crossings?
I'm just thinking
as well?
crossing, yeah, like going from Nottingham Drive, let's say, because there's multifamily already on Nottingham, so you're going to have, people probably coming to this area along it, and then crossing Buck Jones at that intersection, or crossing down where the two developments kind of meet, the west and east. How do we create a safer environment there, like more pedestrian friendly?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to invite Priya from Condo with our transportation department, because a lot of thought and discussion has gone into this specific topic, and I think he can talk a little bit more about that.
Good evening. For the intersection of Nottingham Drive and Buck Jones Road, there will be a signalized, it is already a signalized intersection today. It will have improvements with signalized pedestrian crossings as well as bicycle accommodations. In addition to that, there will be additional locations for signals along Buck Jones Road to allow that pedestrian traffic to go from the eastern side of the development to the western side of the development.
Okay. And you guys are not going to, and potentially like little medians, or that's not a consideration? It's just going to be a crossing? There's no median to kind of,
So we don't know if there's going to be a median yet. Right now, it is a 5-lane cross-section, so the idea is to keep the cross-section as narrow as possible. That would allow for a shorter crossing distance.
okay. And is there, you're talking about bicycles, so is there going to be a connection on Buck Jones for a bicycle lane? Is that what you?
That is correct. Along Buck Jones Road, there will be a separated bicycle lane that'll run parallel to the travel lanes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that was my question. I just wanted to know. Thank you.
One question I had was the 23 floors. I can certainly picture that with the hotel, of course. I was just curious, is that what that's for, or is it also, or do we know, is there going to be 23 floors for other uses as well besides the hotel?
So one of the key things that's unique about this site is the applicant team has not tied the uses really to anything specific other than those ground floor activated uses like we talked about. So when it comes to height zone, it's really separated from the use itself. So it could be a building that's built that includes multiple uses, including residential, office, maybe retail at the ground floor, or it could be one use. And what we would be looking for specifically would be, are the ground floor activated uses met? Then, of course, we are keeping tabs on, the overall mixing of uses as well through the land use ratio, but we don't have any specific uses tied to certain building heights.
Okay. And so that kind of ties into my second question. So we don't know exactly, we've been talking about how the request for the reduction in parking for the multifamily, but we don't know how much of the tract will be multifamily, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
They did model a certain number, but yeah, that ultimate number is not determined yet.
Okay. So I guess the only concern I have is do we have this great project with all these wonderful destinations, and then we got this multifamily component that, are we confident or staff confident that we're going to have enough parking, that we're not going to be migrating parking from the multifamily who doesn't have enough parking into the areas that are being used by the people that are coming to the other areas, and it's a competing scenario where you have to turn to working through time restrictions and other things that make things tougher on everybody. So I just didn't know if y'all had any thoughts to that.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that the justification that's going to be required to be submitted for the use of the shared parking will give us the ability to evaluate on a case-by-case basis, and if we find that the parking is not working in certain areas, we can look at it at a very site-specific level to help make those determinations.
Okay. And then stormwater is, I know this is not tied directly to land use, but I'm just curious, is this particular tract, I'm assuming, because it's almost all parking lot, is probably an area of stormwater concern. I noticed that there was some language in there about the GSI, but I also noticed that there was something about the GSI for the play fields would only be 20% if it went over a certain threshold, and I was just curious why it couldn't be 20% of what is going to be done, because that means, if I read it right.
I think what you may be referring to is the 20% permeable area for community gathering area.
Yeah.
So that will actually, that'll help with stormwater, but that's a separate requirement kind of outside of the stormwater consideration. So one of the things that they're looking to accommodate with this request is to make sure that the community gathering area is not all paved. A lot of the community gathering area will be hardscaped, probably because it's an urban environment. You can
Gotcha.
have benches, like patio areas, things like that. But this will ensure that some of that area will be permeable area.
Okay, I was probably looking at it more of thinking some of the park areas you see out at Fenton, like the Park Square. Okay. I think that's all I had. Most of my other questions have been answered.
I think we all had a lot of great questions, and most of mine have been asked, so I will yield my time.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I have one more.
Sure, go ahead.
For the 30-year AMI 80%, reserve 5%, one of the things I said is they also asked for relief for 15 years, because this project could take 15 years to develop from coming back. So what it says is, the 30 years starts, at the completion of the first project. Well, realistically, if it takes 15 years, then it's actually only, for the last projects, it's only going to be 15 years of, guaranteed 80%, or 5% of the units being built are at 80% of AMI. And so that just want to make sure that that condition actually
Achieves its purpose.
Yeah.
Sure.
Over the long term.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That condition and the associated deed restriction that goes along with it occurs on a building-by-building basis. So as the buildings are permitted, that 30 years takes place. So whether it's permitted tomorrow, a year from tomorrow, 5 years from tomorrow, that clock doesn't start ticking until that building is permitted. That covenant has to be recorded before the permits can be issued for the
Okay.
individual buildings containing multifamily.
I'll say, right now, when I read it, it's not written that way. And that would be my only concern, is making sure that it may be something in the LDOs and in the permitting, and that's what catches it. I'm just saying, in the PDP that I read it, it's just written as the singular project versus individual
No, that's exactly
projects.
right. And that's the way that condition
Manifest?
exists is because it stands alone, and anytime there's a multifamily development that comes along, you pick up this condition, and it's dropped into the approval process for that. So it sounds like it speaks to one project, but that's because that one project is going to be each building containing multifamily units as the development occurs.
Okay, thank you. Very much appreciate that, Jason.
Good? Anybody else? Okay, with that, we'll close the question and answer and move towards making motions. Before we make a motion, I think if there's anyone that's against this, I'm going to ask that they take some extra time to talk. I personally think this is so massive that there's so many questions that really can't be answered right now. But I generally would approve of this, but I think there's a lot to be worked out, especially with parking, so I hope everybody's listened with that. I know a large employer in RTP recently asked all their employees to come back to work, and I couldn't help but notice that they were all parking on the street, up in the grassy areas, so, it seems that, who knows what the trend will be 5 years from now. I have no idea, but I do think that that is my number one thing. If I were to say, oh, I'm not for this, it would be because I would not be for reducing the parking. But I'm going to not let that stop me. But I do believe it's something serious that I hope that addressed as this goes forward, especially as it gets back to the town council. Having said that, would someone like to make a motion for 23 REZ 05 South Hills PDP rezoning?
I move that the board find 23 REZ 05 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Perfect. And you said consistent, right?
Yes.
Okay. Would someone like to second that?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Comments?
This is a very exciting project, and I don't know that, how many more of these in terms of redevelopment opportunities that we have, and it seemed like the applicant put a lot of incredible thought into this project. Definitely hits everything I wanted to see in the live, work, and play areas of the community plan. Couldn't be more excited.
Excellent.
Yeah, no, exactly. I feel the same way. Being a resident here for almost 40 years and seeing South Hills go through the different waves of everything it's been through, I think there's a few businesses that will always be loved and cherished there, but I also feel like it's a long time overdue for this next phase to begin and that tract develop in this kind of fashion, so I'm looking forward to it.
Perfect. Any other comments?
The only thing I would say, I wholeheartedly agree and believe that this is where we want to go in the future and am supportive of the plan. One of the things that we focused on a little bit today that I hadn't thought about a lot was reuse rather than redevelopment when you're talking about 27 blocks. And it's hard for me to get my arms around how we can take what we have there today and reuse it because it's so not new and urban and all those things. So just, watching and making certain that it's consistent with the vision. And it's interesting that that's the name of our document, right? It's the vision, Cary, and here's where we are trying to imagine the future. But that reuse versus redevelopment was something that when I read through this, I hadn't really thought of, trying to reuse. It felt like things being completely redeveloped was more in line with what I expected. But I fully am excited about the opportunity that it presents.
Any other comments?
I just want to say that this is exciting because of the pedestrian, like I always look at, growing the pedestrian access, bicycles, people walking. So something like this, there is possibility that some of those lots around it are also going to kind of encourage that kind of development. And something we want to see, but I think making sure that it's safe and accessible on a pedestrian level is what's going to make it successful. And really, the vision is going to be successful if it's done right. So hoping for that.
Perfect.
I just had one other thing.
Go ahead.
Reading through this, it was overwhelming, like the amount of things that have gone on. And so thank you to the staff. I mean, we've got, more staff than we've ever had at one of these events before. And it's obvious that hundreds and hundreds of hours have been spent getting us here. So just want to say thank you genuinely for all that's been done.
Okay. And again, I agree with this. It's just massive, and I do thank everyone that showed up here tonight. The board members, again, have spent a lot of their, private home time studying this, and I think that shows just in the questions and the involvement that they've had. I know that the applicant heard us, will listen. I have high faith in the staff that Scott and you guys will get all this worked out as it goes down. I think there are a lot of things that need to be sorted out. You've heard some of them tonight, and I put all my faith and trust in the council. I know they'll get this worked out. So overall, again, I think it's a good deal. And Chris, like you, 30 years ago when I moved here, one of the first places I went in Cary was to the South Hills Barber Shop. So I think we all have memories of this area and look forward to what it can be in the future. All right, having said that, all in favor of finding 23 REZ05 consistent with the comprehensive plans, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Jason, thank you for your time tonight. Okay, we have one new business item, and Katie, that's you. But it has to be very short.
It's all about you, Mr. Crutchfield.
That's why it has to be very short.
Well, the last item we had on our agenda was just the recognition of our outgoing board members, and we just have one outgoing board member for this term, and that's our chair, Mr. Crutchfield. So thank you on behalf of staff for all the work that you've done, putting in time on your weekends, reading these very, very long staff reports and making site visits and all the thoughtful questions that you have. And thank you again for your time. We'll greatly miss you.
Thank you. My time has gone by really quickly. 3 terms, it just seems like it just happened. I was telling some of the folks earlier, I'm the last relic from when we actually had citizens that came in here and presented to us. Some of the staff remembers it well. Those meetings were unbelievable. Somebody in their great wisdom changed it to what it is today, which is much better, with these folks giving their advice to the town council, which is the way it should be. So I think that's one of the biggest changes. I think of all the time I've been on the board, the developments that we have had lately are without a doubt the most massive. I think about Fenton and what we're talking about tonight and what we've talked about the other gateways. So I think in the future, it's just going to be smaller because, there's just really not that much left over. So these board members have been awesome. I don't want to say they're the best ever, but I will kind of say it. So I've been really privileged to have that. Scott, thank you for allowing me to send all my emails and for the calls and meetings and whatnot. I think the town of Cary, I wish most citizens could see how this works. And I think when you're on one of these boards, that's probably your biggest takeaway is, wow, I mean, look at all these people, they're here. It is 8 o'clock at night and you're still here. So that says a lot. And so I think I wish everyone could see this and appreciate it. So it's awesome to have worked with you guys. So I appreciate it, and time to call it a wrap. So with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.